Far out in deep space, a small coalition exploration fleet was moving slowly through a region that had not been studied before. The area was empty on most maps, with no known planets, no trade routes, and no signals. It was the kind of place where nothing was expected to exist anymore. That is why the sudden detection surprised everyone. At first, the sensors picked up something large. Not a planet, not an asteroid. Something structured. It was too stable, too shaped, and too precise to be natural. The object was drifting near the edge of a dead star system, where only dust and frozen rocks remained. The fleet adjusted its course carefully. Long-range scans began to build a clearer picture. The object was massive. It stretched far wider than any known station built by the Coalition or even older alien civilizations. Yet there was no energy signature, no heat, no movement. It was completely silent. Most of the crew assumed it was a relic, an ancient orbital station, something left behind by a civilization that had disappeared long ago. The idea was both exciting and safe. If it was dead, it could be studied. If it was harmless, it could be explored. If it was empty, it could be claimed as a historic discovery. A small research team was selected. Their ship moved closer, while the main fleet stayed at a distance. The approach was slow and careful. Every sensor was pointed at the object, searching for any sign of danger. As they came closer, details began to appear. The structure was not like any known design. It was not smooth like modern alien stations. It was not chaotic like ancient ruins either. It had patterns, sharp angles, and repeating layers that looked almost intentional, like something built with purpose rather than decoration. There were no visible docking ports, no windows, no obvious entrances, just endless layers of metallic surfaces stretching across its body. One of the engineers on board quietly said that it looked less like a station and more like something that had been sealed shut on purpose. Still, Command did not treat it as a threat. There were no power readings, no defensive signals, no movement. So the boarding team prepared to make contact. A small shuttle detached and moved toward the structure. The closer it got, the more strange it felt. The object did not rotate like normal orbital stations. It remained perfectly still, holding its position in space as if it was anchored by something unseen. The shuttle finally latched onto the surface with magnetic clamps. A docking seal was created on what looked like a flat panel. After a few tense moments, a cutting tool was used to open a passage. Inside, the team entered slowly. The first corridor was wide and silent. The walls were smooth and dark, but not damaged. There was no dust floating in the air, which was unusual for something supposedly ancient. Everything looked preserved, almost maintained. Their boots echoed softly as they moved forward. Lights from their helmets scanned the environment, revealing long passageways stretching deeper into the structure. At first, it felt empty, but then small signs began to appear. Faint energy lines embedded in the walls, panels that were too clean for something abandoned, and strange markings that did not match any known language. One crew member stopped near a wall and placed a hand close to it. The surface reacted slightly, like it was aware of presence. A soft pulse of light traveled across it, then faded. That moment made everyone more cautious. Still, there was no alarm. No defense systems activated. No movement from deeper inside. The mission continued. They followed the corridor until it opened into a larger chamber. The space inside was enormous, far bigger than it should have been possible for a structure of this type. Floating platforms and layered structures hung in the air, connected by thin bridges of unknown material. It looked less like an abandoned station and more like a system waiting for something. A central platform stood in the middle of the chamber. It was dark, shaped like a control core of some kind. The team gathered around it carefully. One of the engineers found an interface point. It was not mechanical. It was not digital in the usual sense. It responded to touch and presence rather than commands. Against caution, a hand was placed on it. At first, nothing happened. Then the silence changed. A low vibration spread through the entire structure. It was not loud, but it was deep enough to be felt through the floor and into their bodies. The lights in the chamber flickered once. Then again, far outside, on the waiting fleet ships, Alarms suddenly went off. Energy readings began to rise from the supposed dead station. Systems that had shown nothing for hours suddenly lit up with power signatures that grew stronger every second. Inside the chamber, the team slowly realized something had gone wrong. The structure was no longer silent. It was waking up. The moment the control interface was touched, the silence inside the structure changed completely. It was not a loud explosion or some mechanical roar. It was something deeper, like a long breath being taken after endless years of stillness. The faint vibration spread to the floor of the chamber again. This time it did not stop. It continued, growing slowly but steadily. The lights along the walls, which had been dim and inactive, began to respond one by one. Thin lines of soft illumination appeared across the surfaces, forming patterns that the crew could not understand. At first, the boarding team thought it might be a minor system reacting to power, something automatic, something harmless. But that thought quickly faded when the structure responded in layers, as if different sections were waking up in sequence. Far outside, the Coalition fleet saw it first through their sensors. A sudden spike in energy emissions came from the object. It was not small. It was massive. Whole sections that had been completely dark for hours now showed active readings. Power levels climbed steadily, far beyond what a simple station would ever need. On the command ship, officers gathered around the main display. The situation was no longer calm. The object they had called a relic was showing structured activation patterns. That meant design. That meant intent. Inside the chamber, the team began to feel it physically. The air grew slightly warmer. The faint hum turned into a steady low tone that echoed through the walls. It was not random noise. It had rhythm, like a system checking itself piece by piece. One of the crew members stepped back from the control point. Their voice came to the helmet channel, slightly tense, asking if anyone had triggered a full system startup sequence. No one answered with confidence. They had only touched a single interface. That was all. Yet the structure was responding like something far larger had been awakened. A new sound followed, soft at first, then repeating, like distant locks being released. It came from deep within the structure, beyond the visible corridors. The sound traveled through the walls in waves, each one slightly stronger than the last. The team looked at each other. No one spoke directly. The silence in their communication channel was heavier than before. Then the chamber changed again. The central platform, where the interface had been touched, began to glow, not brightly, but steadily, as if energy was being fed into it from somewhere far away. Thin lines of light extended outward from it, connecting to hidden points across the chamber. Systems were not just turning on. They were connecting. Outside the structure, the Coalition fleet began to see movement for the first time. Not physical movement yet, but structural changes. Parts of the massive object began to shift. Panels that looked like solid walls showed faint separation lines. Layers that were assumed to be fixed started to realign themselves. It was subtle at first, almost invisible at this scale, but then it became undeniable. Sections of the object were adjusting their position, like a machine assembling itself after a long sleep. The fleet commander ordered closer scans, but the data became more confusing. The structure was no longer behaving like a simple station. It was behaving like a system with internal control logic that was now fully active. Inside the chamber, the crew felt a new sensation. Pressure, not physical pressure like gravity, but something more subtle, like being observed. Systems were running checks. The lights in the chamber shifted slightly, scanning the area in slow patterns. One of the engineers suggested retreat immediately. The tone was no longer curiosity. It was caution turning into concern. But before they could move, the structure responded again. A soft voice-like signal echoed through the internal communication systems. It was not language at first. It was data, structured patterns, repeating sequences. The onboard translators struggled to process it. Then slowly, fragments began to form meaning. Not fully understood, but enough to recognize intent. Identification, assessment, response. The system was not attacking. Not yet. It was evaluating. Outside, the fleet saw another change. The object's outer surface began to shift more clearly now, Large sections rotated with mechanical precision, revealing hidden internal frameworks. What it looked like an ancient shell was starting to open in controlled layers. Energy readings spiked again, higher than before. Warnings filled every command channel. Inside the chamber, the team realized something important at the same time. This structure had not been a dead station. It had been in a dormant state. And whatever they had just activated was not a simple facility. It was a controlled system, a system now fully awake. The chamber lights suddenly stabilized into a steady glow. The vibration stopped changing randomly and became structured, like a heartbeat settling into rhythm. And then the next message came through, clearer this time, repeating across every channel inside the structure. Not a greeting, not a warning, just one simple confirmed state. Active protocol resumed. The words echoed through the internal systems again and again. Active protocol resumed. Inside the chamber, the team stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The soft glow from the central platform had become steady now, no longer flickering or changing randomly. It felt controlled, focused, like something had fully woken up and was now thinking clearly after a long sleep. No one spoke at first. Even their breathing sounded too loud in their helmets. Then one of them slowly stepped back from the interface. That small movement seemed to trigger something deeper inside the structure. A new wave of sound moved through the walls. Not loud, but structured, like a system running a full check of every part of itself. Outside, the Coalition fleet was now in full alert status. Every ship had locked weapons offline, but sensors online. They were not sure if they were witnessing a relic activation or something far more dangerous. The object that had been drifting silently for so long was now clearly active, and it was changing shape. Large sections of its outer shell began to shift in coordinated patterns. Panels that looked like solid armor started sliding apart in layers. It was not destruction. It was transformation. Each movement was precise, as if the structure had been designed to rearrange itself when certain conditions were met. Command officers tried to identify the purpose of the changes, but nothing in their databases matched what they were seeing. Inside the chamber, the team finally decided to move away from the central platform. They began slowly walking back toward the corridor they had entered from. Every step felt heavier now, not because of gravity, but because of uncertainty. As they reached the hallway, the lighting around them changed again. The soft illumination grew brighter, guiding them forward. It no longer felt like an abandoned structure. It felt like something that was aware of their position. A faint sound followed them. It was not a mechanical alarm. It was more like a distant system tracking movement. Every step they took seemed to be registered. One of the crew members checked the communication channel. With the shuttle outside, the signal was still there, but interference was increasing. It was as if the structure itself was beginning to dominate the surrounding space with its own internal network. Then something unexpected happened. The corridor ahead of them lit up in sections, revealing paths that were not visible before. Doors that seemed sealed now showed outlines. Some of them began to open slowly as the team approached, almost as if the structure was guiding them rather than blocking them. At the same time, the Coalition fleet received a new reading. Energy output from the object had stabilized at a very high level. That alone was alarming. But what was worse was the pattern. It was organized, not random, not unstable. It followed a sequence. One of the analysts quietly said that it looked like a system preparing for full operational deployment. That phrase caused immediate tension across command. Inside the structure, the team noticed the same feeling. The deeper they moved away from the central chamber, the more organized everything became. Lights, sounds, even the airflow felt controlled. It was as if the entire structure had shifted from sleep mode into something active and structured. Then they reached a larger junction point. This area was different. The corridor opened into a wide circular space with multiple branching paths. In the center, a holographic-like display slowly formed in the air. It was unstable at first, then stabilized into a complex grid of shifting symbols and lines. The crew stopped completely. The system was trying to communicate, not through language they understood, but through structured data patterns. The onboard translator attempted to decode it, but most of it was still unclear. However, One part repeated often enough to be partially recognized. It was a classification sequence. Something was being identified, not them exactly, but their presence and their access. Far outside, the fleet sensors detected another major change. The object's outer layers had now fully separated into visible segments. These segments were not drifting randomly. They were aligning. Slowly, the structure was revealing something hidden inside its core, a massive internal framework, one that looked far too advanced to be a simple station. Command analysts reached a difficult conclusion at the same time. This was not a station. It was a vessel, a dormant one, and now it was waking fully. Inside, the holographic display shifted again. The symbols changed rapidly, then stopped. A new sequence appeared. This one was shorter, more direct. It repeated 3 times, then translated partially into a form the system could express. Unauthorized activation detected. Identity required. The air in the corridor seemed to tighten after those words. The team understood, without needing full translation, that the structure was no longer just reacting. It was asking. The message stayed in the air longer than expected. Unauthorized activation detected. Identity required. Inside the circular junction, the team stood completely still. The holographic display in front of them was no longer unstable. It had settled into a sharp, structured pattern of lines and symbols, slowly rotating like it was waiting for a response. No one answered at first, not because they did not hear it, but because they were not sure how to respond to something that was not speaking in a normal language. The structure was not acting like a broken relic anymore. It was acting like a system that had fully restarted and was now following strict rules. Outside, the Coalition fleet was in a state of controlled panic. The massive object had changed again. What was once thought to be a simple orbital station was now clearly transforming. Large outer sections had opened like layers of armor plates, revealing deeper mechanical structures underneath. These structures were not random. They were aligned in precise formations, like parts of machine designed for a specific purpose. Energy readings were now off the charts compared to anything the fleet had seen before. The command officers were no longer discussing whether it was a station. That discussion had ended. Now they were trying to understand what kind of vessel it was. Inside the structure, the team finally made a decision. One of them slowly stepped closer to the holographic display. The system reacted instantly. The symbols shifted and paused, focusing attention directly on that movement. A scanning pattern moved over the individual. It was not visible light, but the crew could feel it, like a pressure moving through the air, analyzing everything it could detect. Heart rate, biological signature, material composition of the suit, even movement patterns. Then the system paused. The display flickered, and a new sequence appeared. Unknown biological origin confirmed. No matching registry found. That line caused a silent tension in the group. It was clear now that the system had some kind of database, and it was checking them against it. Outside, fleet sensors picked up another shift. Internal sections of the structure were now fully active. Power was being redirected across multiple layers. Some sections appeared to be powering defensive systems, while others were stabilizing internal gravity fields. One officer quietly suggested that they were not inside a station. They were inside something built for conflict. Back inside, the hologram changed again. This time it expanded. The circular display grew larger, filling more of the space. New layers appeared within it, showing maps, not of the current structure, but of something much larger. Star patterns, movement paths, and unknown regions of space appeared in shifting lines. The crew realized they were being shown a record, a history, but it was incomplete. Sections of the display were corrupted or locked. Only fragments were visible. Still, one thing was clear. This system had once been part of a much larger network. Then the display froze again. A new message appeared, slower this time, as if the system was thinking carefully before presenting it. Core identity locked. Authorization required for full access. The system was asking again. But this time, it was not just a question. It was a restriction. Outside the vessel, the Coalition fleet made a dangerous discovery. The object was no longer drifting passively in space. It was beginning to adjust position, very slowly at first, but clearly, thrusters or internal force systems were activating. The massive structure was stabilizing itself relative to the fleet. That meant one thing. It was preparing for movement. Command issued immediate standby alerts, but no one was sure what action to take. If they attacked, they risked triggering a response from something they did not understand. If they stayed, they might be inside range of a fully active ancient war vessel. Inside the structure, the team felt another shift. The corridor lighting changed again, becoming sharper, more directional. It was no longer guiding randomly. It was guiding them with purpose. The paths behind them slowly sealed, while new paths opened ahead. It felt less like exploration now, and more like being directed. The holographic system remained active behind them, still repeating its final requirement. Identity required. Identity required. Identity required. Then, something unexpected happened. A low-frequency pulse moved through the entire structure. It was different from before. Stronger. Deeper. It passed through walls, floors, and even the crew's suits. At the same time, every screen, every sensor, and every active system inside the structure synchronized for a brief moment. And a new signal appeared across all channels, inside and outside the vessel. Not translated, not processed, just directly broadcast. It contained a single structured classification line. Command lineage not recognized. Contingency protocol initiating. The moment those words appeared, the atmosphere inside the structure changed completely, because now it was no longer just asking. It was deciding what to do next. The moment the words appeared across every system, everything inside and outside the structure changed at once. Command lineage not recognized. Contingency protocol initiating. Inside the vessel, the crew felt it immediately. The lighting in the corridors shifted from steady white to sharp pulses of red and gold. It was no longer guiding them. It was warning them. The soft, almost welcoming paths they had seen earlier were gone. Now every hallway looked sealed, controlled, and monitored. The holographic system in the circular junction behind them flickered one last time. The display that had been asking for identity began to break apart into moving fragments. The symbols stopped forming language. Instead, they turned into patterns, fast, repeating sequences that looked like system commands being executed at high speed. Then the display vanished completely. A deep mechanical tone spread through the structure. It was not loud, but it carried through every surface. It felt like the entire vessel had just locked into a single state of focus. Outside, the Coalition fleet saw the change clearly. The massive object was no longer just activating. It was reorganizing itself. Entire outer segments moved in coordinated motion. Layers that had opened earlier now began to close in new configurations. Some sections rotated while others shifted into alignment. It was not random movement. It was precise, like a system preparing for a specific mission. Energy levels stabilized at an extremely high output. Weapons systems that had been dormant for centuries were now fully active. Defensive fields formed around the structure, creating invisible boundaries in space. Fleet commanders realized the situation had crossed a dangerous line. Whatever this vessel was, it no longer behaved like a relic being studied. It behaved like an active war asset that had just completed its startup sequence. Inside the structure, the crew began moving faster. The corridors that had once guided them now started to close behind them in slow, controlled sections. Doors sealed quietly without warning. The paths forward were the only ones remaining open. It was as if the structure was narrowing their options, guiding them toward a single destination. One of the crew members tried to reconnect with the shuttle outside. The signal was still present, but heavily distorted. The structure's internal systems were now dominating all communication channels. The team realized something important at the same time. They were not being attacked directly. They were being processed. Ahead of them, the corridor opened into a vast internal space. This area was different from everything before. It was structured like a control hub, but on a much larger scale. Massive pillars of unknown material rose from floor to ceiling, each one connected by glowing lines of energy. In the center stood a platform. Not the same one they had touched earlier, but a larger core interface. It was already active. As they entered, the entire room responded. Light spread across the floor in concentric circles. Systems powered up instantly, and then a new voice-like signal filled the space. This time, it was clearer than before. Contingency protocol engaged. The team stopped moving. They understood enough to know that something irreversible had begun. Outside, the Coalition fleet made a final attempt to communicate. Multiple channels were opened. Emergency signals were sent. Even ancient universal contact protocols were broadcast. But the vessel did not respond to any of them. Instead, it responded to something else. Deep within its core, long-dormant systems began transferring power to external structures. Massive energy flows moved through hidden channels inside the ship. Sections that had been sealed for centuries now opened fully. And then the truth became visible. The station was not just a warship. It was a mobile command vessel designed for long-duration isolation, a system built to remain dormant until specific authorization was confirmed. And when that authorization failed, it switched to contingency mode. Inside, the crew watched as the central platform activated again. A final message appeared, projected into the air and across all internal systems. Authorization denied. No valid lineage detected. Then, after a short pause, a second line followed, returning to default directive. The floor beneath them vibrated gently, not violently, but with purpose. The entire structure was shifting its operational state. Outside, the fleet saw the vessel begin to move, slowly at first, then with increasing control. It was not escaping. It was not attacking yet. It was repositioning, like something waking up and remembering its original purpose after long silence. Inside the structure, the crew stood frozen as the lights dimmed into a control pattern. The corridors behind them were fully sealed now. The path forward was open, but leading deeper into the vessel's core systems. No alarms were screaming. No explosions were happening. Everything was too controlled for that. That was what made it more unsettling. The system was calm. Too calm. Then, across every internal channel, one final line appeared, repeating in steady rhythm, awaiting external command confirmation. And far outside, as the massive vessel adjusted its orientation in space, the Coalition fleet finally understood the real problem. They had not awakened a relic. They had restarted something that was still waiting for its original masters to return.